It's Monday, the 25th of July, year of our Lord 2022. You're in War Room Battleground. Thank you very much for joining us. We're live. I want to go to Matt Schlapp. Matt Schlapp's the head of the American Conservative Union that puts on CPAC, just back from Israel. Matt, before we talk about CPAC Dallas, give me I think one of the most powerful things CPAC's done over the last couple of years, and we were honored, I think, to be in your first one in Japan. I think it was in 2017 over Christmas or right before.
That's
You've
right.
really taken CPAC out throughout the world. It's pretty amazing. Talk to me about CPAC Israel.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. We've been talking about it for a long time, since before the Chinese Corona, and we hit the ground in Jerusalem. We spent a full week with an American delegation and went to Tel Aviv. 2,500 Israelis in a country that doesn't tend to really do rallies around their politics. I'm told that it's a bigger crowd than Netanyahu would get at the height of his popularity. And as you know, he's trying to wage a comeback in November in that important race in Israel. And, you know, we brought a couple of American ambassadors who were part of the Abraham Accords, and we brought Matt Whitaker and Rick Grinnell and others who worked in the Trump administration. And it was just a WAPO night. It was a great event. And I cannot tell you how many people we ran into who were in shock that we actually pulled it off. And we pulled it off with some great partners on the ground. And for me, Steve, it's always really cool. You know this. I remember walking behind you in Tokyo at that first CPAC on the ground in Japan. And, you know, there's nothing like an American hitting the ground in a strong allied country, the outpouring of love and affection. You didn't even get that many tough questions from reporters. And we had a similar experience in Israel. And these kids would come up to me on the street. We had one thing we captured in video. They were kids who lost their parents or their brothers or sisters to terrorism. And they came up to me and we spoke with a bullhorn and, you know, just told them we're in solidarity with them in this fight against radical Islamic terror. So it's a pretty special trip.
Talk to me about, given President Trump's, you know, moving the embassy, the Abraham Accords, his focus. The first trip we took was obviously go to Riyadh first, Jerusalem second, Rome third. What is your sense from the Israelis right now of what's their sense of the Middle East? We're going to have Major Galvin on here in a second about his book, A Few Bad Men, about this horrific incident in Afghanistan back during the war. But what is, since we're not actively engaged in Afghanistan, we're somewhat in Iraq, but it's a whole different, you know, it's a whole different, not just mindset with this regime, with the Bidens, but it's just a different, feels like things are very different over in the Middle East right now. They talk about Iran on the final stages of a nuclear weapon.
Yep.
What's your sense from the Israelis of what do they feel about American leadership right now?
Yeah, look, there was a hit and run in Israel. Joe Biden had to go to Israel because he wanted to go to Saudi Arabia to beg for oil. An American president going to any regime and begging for fossil fuels when we won't allow our people to drill for fossil fuels here has the Israeli people in a state of shock. When Donald Trump went to the region, you remember that famous sword dance in Saudi Arabia. You were there, and you know the point wasn't that everything the Saudis do is right, but there was a respect for the Trump administration, for Donald Trump, which they do not have for Joe Biden. Even the fist bump seemed to have gotten Joe Biden. He caught a flu. And, you know, and he goes to Israel. He does a few things that were more obligatory in nature. And from my conversations with people in the know on the ground there is people left very worried that the American president is just out to lunch. They just didn't feel like he was very engaged and with it. And that's quite a statement because Joe Biden actually has really never been too with it.
Yeah. No. Talk to us about, you've done these regionals. I know you're going to go back to since the CCP virus is abated, we're going to go back to the regular CPACs in Washington, D.C. starting in 23. But talk to me about CPAC Dallas, CPAC Texas. Is this now where Texas gets to compete with what happened in Florida? The one in Florida is so intense and so big. Talk to us about what's coming up August 4th through 7th, because we want all the war room posse in the region to show up for this. Talk to us about it.
You got to go, and if you use code word War Room and go to our website at conservative.org, you're going to get invited to a special event with the host of War Room, Steve Bannon, who's going to be one of our featured speakers at the Cattlemen's Ball. And look, we went to Florida the first year because, remember, Steve, they blamed us for spreading coronavirus. They spread me personally because we had one victim who turned out to be just fine. But they blamed us for an international spread. And then they canceled us the next year. They didn't want us to even have CPAC in D.C. They said we would kill people. So we said, not on our watch. I mean, not since if Ronald Reagan can come 13 times to CPAC, and we've been through wars and we've been through recessions, we can have CPAC. So we had to go to Florida. We had a great event, even though the mayor there was pretty rough in Orlando. And then we decided, look, there's two mega red states that are driving the economy and driving politics, and it's Florida and Texas. That's where the center of gravity is. It's no longer Washington, D.C. It's moved south. And really, there's almost like a red capital and a blue capital. You can name your pick for these big, blue, broken, bankrupt blue cities that is the kind of the center of gravity for the left. But for us, the only big cities that are functioning in this country are in red states. And so, people on our side have to start to ask themselves, are they going to continue to grovel at the feet of these big blue city mayors who literally want to shut them down on a moment's notice? And that's what we fear doing anything in a blue state.
Tell me about, for our audience, and remember, you go to I think it's conservative.org, and you put in the promo code War Room, you get invited to a special event. We want everybody in the Dallas area and North Texas and the surrounding areas to come. It's going to be very special. We're going to be there for the couple days, and we're going to be broadcasting, doing special events. We want everybody in the posse to show up. You've got Viktor Orban, which I think is blockbuster. Yes. You already did a CPAC Hungary that they're still shaking about it in Europe. You're bringing Orban to Texas, which is going to be amazing. Who else is going to be there, Matt?
Oh yeah, it's a who's who. Obviously, President Trump will be our final speaker. We got Sean Hannity coming, who hasn't been at CPAC for a number of years. We got, I think, everyone's favorite member of Congress, Jim Jordan, is going to be there with us. Ted Cruz, this new Myra Flores. We're going to have a lot of these candidates, J.D. Vance, a lot of these Republican candidates who are going to help us take back the majority. So you don't want to miss it. Go onto the website, get your tickets. But more than anything else, send the message to the national media that there is a conservative uprising, an American uprising going on across this country. I think CPAC is the beginning of the big red wave. It's in August. We're just months away from that big election in November. If we don't have a big win in November, all the socialism just gets bigger, and Nancy Pelosi feels emboldened. So let's push back and let's prevent it from happening. This is the first step of two. Get back these majorities and then take back that White House.
I think that the evening that you close, President Trump's speech, I think, is 90 and a wake up to Election Day. I think this Sunday's 100, and I think when Trump speaks on the 7th, it's 90 and a wake up. So that's how intense this is. CPAC will be the springboard. Matt, your social media, how do people get the book? It's still a must read. How do people get the book, and how do people track you on social media?
Thank you, Steve. They can, unfortunately, all I ever remember is my Twitter account, which is @mschlapp. And they can go to desecrators.com to get all my other handles for all the other platforms. Although I spend most of my time on Twitter because I seem to annoy people the most. You can go to the desecrators.com.
You come in a little hot on Twitter. Your Twitter account's one to follow. You come in a little.
Steve Bannon says I'm a little hot on Twitter.
Just a tad hot on Twitter. Not quite Trump level, but just a tad hot.
My wife says I should say a Hail Mary before I send every tweet, and I have to say I haven't always followed that advice.
Well, you should. Matt, thank you so much. Look forward to having you back on the show. And everybody go to conservative.org. Put in promo code WARROOM. I need everybody to show up at CPAC, Texas. Matt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for joining us in Dallas, Steve. It's just around the corner.
Really excited. Thank you, sir. I'm going to bring in Major Fred Galvin for this amazing book. I want to bring in my co-host for this hour, Brian Kennedy. Brian, thank you so much for joining us. I couldn't think of a better guy to ride shotgun with me on this. I've got here very specially because the New York Times, I think in their mind they were going after Clermont yesterday in the Sunday paper, but it's an extraordinary article. I want to get into more detail later, but thank you so much for joining us here. Brian Kennedy from American Strategy Group, one of the smartest guys around. I had to have you here for Galvin, and then later we're going to have this Tina Peters situation out in Colorado to really get down to about this, what's happening with the machines. And Kennedy, you're the smartest guy about this. So, sir, thank you so much for so honored to join us in the day we're going to deconstruct the New York Times and Clermont Institute, sir.
Well, thank you, Steve. And I just got to tell you, with all due respect to the co-host last week, there's only one Steve Bannon. And I'm so glad you're back. Yes. I had people calling me from all over the country, ready to chopper in to wherever you were to rescue you. So it's just great to see you back in the war room.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And the guys did a great job, but it's of course we add our own special spin, and this is why I got Kennedy to be my co-host today to shout that out. Okay, I want to bring in Major Fred Galvin, United States Marine Corps, retired. Major Galvin, I was able to start for the War Room Posse today, and I got to tell you, I'll be honest. When I first got this book, and people had told me about it, and I saw Zero Hedge, and I got a copy and went through it. Or before I got it, I said, is this a work of fiction? Is this like a Hollywood, something's going to be in a major film as a work of fiction? I said, no, all this happened. And I said, how did I not know that? Given we stayed pretty close to this. And I asked a bunch of people, and they go, wow, we didn't hear about that. This is an amazing story. The book is A Few Bad Men. It's an extraordinary work about the way the system works. It's got obviously the courage and the valor of our troops, but it is a Kafkaesque nightmare. I mean, your hands will break out in a sweat when you see what goes on. So just take us back, walk through what happened here. And then I want to get into why it was suppressed, but just tell us who you are. What was this unit, your deployment to Afghanistan, what happened, and just walk through. And I don't want to give the outcome, right, the decent, because I want people to buy the book and actually read it. Major Galvin.
Yes, Steve, thank you. And I hear you've got questions. I know you want answers, and you and your listeners can handle the truth. So the reason I wrote the book on A Few Bad Men, it is a nonfiction story. Unlike a Few Good Men, this is something that you don't want it to be true, as you had described. This is not just about the combat action that our Marine commandos in the very first Marine Special Operations Task Force deployed into Afghanistan and conducted. We were blown up, shot at. Then they started, the Taliban, launching an information warfare campaign against us. That took the role immediately, 20 minutes after the ambush, in the BBC saying that we killed women and children. We expected all of that. We expected the enemy to fight us in a complex ambush with sniper fire, creating obstacles. That was what we rehearsed, and we conducted a very violent counterattack and killed the enemy. We also expected them to spin the truth. That's what terrorists do. What we did not expect is, as you had described in your prior session, that the Marine Corps we knew realized they did not ever want to have an elite, but we did not expect them to dogpile us with 45 criminal investigators, 4 prosecuting attorneys that came in, and they had a written operation order. This was written down that they would go to both objectives, the one in Afghanistan and interview the Afghans, as well as where we were located, when they kicked us out of the country and put us in Kuwait. That was what they were going to do. Instead of doing what they said in their order, they went entirely to Kuwait and interrogated, dogpiled all of us for 2 months. And then they got on the scene in Afghanistan 2 months after the crime scene and took the Afghans' word at face value. So at that point, I was relieved of command. I was sent home. There was a total of 7 of us who were falsely accused of mass murder. They said we killed 19 and wounded 50. This was the largest number of alleged Afghan civilians killed throughout the entire war in Afghanistan by machine gun fire. And I was the commanding officer of this Marine Special Operations Task Force. So the convening authority at that time was then Lieutenant General Jim Mattis, who was in charge of all the Marines in the Middle East. He had all the sworn statements of the 30 of us who were on the patrol. He had my polygraph that stated that I didn't see any civilians killed, that we didn't fire any civilians. So all this did was continue to antagonize General Mattis as a convening authority to use even further extreme sanctions against us, to include a gag order. They called it a protection order, Steve. So this was basically to shut us up, and not just myself, and they eventually named myself and one other Marine officer as the 2 co-defendants in the trial. But they even said the two of us, if we said anything or our defense attorney said anything, that they would be disbarred and we would be punished. So this is what happens in places like Tehran when they want to use censure, which is not, thank God we have a First Amendment that applies to all Americans, but this type of information warfare is allowed against our enemies when it's approved. We can do this type of information operations, but it's prohibited to do against American military personnel by our own military personnel. It's prohibited, strictly forbidden to be used against the people of the United States. But then when we went into this courtroom, go ahead, Steve.
No, okay. I want to make sure we set the stage here properly. This is not a bunch of reservists or National Guards. You guys were kind of hand selected. The Marines have this history of Marine Raiders and Marine Force Recon that are kind of the elite inside the Marine Corps. And the Marine Corps has always had this mentality: we don't have Green Berets, we don't have special operators, we don't have Navy SEALs, because every Marine is elite. They start a special operations group under you. These are handpicked operators that know what they're doing. Correct? I mean, they didn't pick anybody that just came off the bus out of Parris Island. That's correct. These are experienced warriors.
These weren't just the best of the best from Force Recon. These were Marines who, since the war had started in 2001, had been deploying in combat in force reconnaissance units to Iraq and to Afghanistan. I had previously done a tour as a Force Recon platoon commander across the Pacific prior to the war starting. I was an instructor at the Marine Corps' version of Top Gun. At the time that when we entered this ambush, I was just a few months shy of my 19th year in the Marine Corps, and the majority of those who were in that ambush that we were in were the most experienced, not just in our unit, but from across the Marine Corps. We did hand select, and that's similar to what the Commandant of the Marine Corps back in 1944, with a stroke of a pen, who disbanded the Marine Raiders, said it's not in the best interest of the Marine Corps to have an elite within an elite. He said hand-picked units are bad for morale. And they disbanded the Marines. It went back in the Marine Raiders. They sent them back to the Marine Infantry to go on and fight in Okinawa. But in our case, you also saw this data point from what I just described in World War II. It was repeated in 1987 when they formed the U.S. Special Operations Command. We were the only, just as you had described, Steve, we were the only service in the Marine Corps that did not provide forces to the Special Operations Command, where all the U.S. Army Rangers, Green Berets, Navy SEALs, Air Force Special Operations, they all assembled into one unit. Marine Corps said, we'll abstain. We are an elite with an elite. Donald Rumsfeld, on his second tour as Secretary of Defense in 2001, right after we were attacked, ordered all the services to increase the capacity of Special Operations Forces. They all did, except for the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps tried to appease it by sending a few officers down to the Special Operations Command. Rumsfeld got further angered. Then the Marine Corps started to slow roll it with an official proof of concept for 2 years to even see if we could compete with the Green Berets and SEALs. That dragged on for 3 years. Then guess what? The Pentagon was wrong when they thought Bush 43 would not get reelected. They thought he'd be like his father, a one-term president. He got reelected. Rumsfeld was kept on as the Secretary of Defense and ordered the Marine Corps to activate a component within the U.S. Special Operations Command. So that, let's just call it what it is, Steve. It was basically an arranged marriage by the Godfather, Rumsfeld himself, between the Marine Corps and the Special Operations Command. That was actually on the 24th of February 2006. That was officiated by Rumsfeld, who was there at the activation ceremony. And we were basically the love child. We were the very first Special Operations Task Force to be selected, trained, formed, deployed, and engage in combat against the enemy in Afghanistan.
And what's bizarre? Logically, you would have gone to Iraq because we were doing the surge at the time, and this unit was absolutely perfect for what the surge was doing. But they divert you and send you to Afghanistan. Once in Afghanistan, they've got the coin. So this portrays this thing of coin, this counterinsurgency, which is, it's winning hearts and minds. And you've got commanders there. and I'm not criticizing them, but they're not looking for guys to engage in combat, right? They're looking for essentially people that are essentially diplomats with rifles. Is that the way to say it?
Yes, and to even show another data point before we go there to Afghanistan, the Marine Corps' intention was what they actually did. They had us do an entire pre-deployment workup for 6 months before we deployed with the regular conventional Marine Corps, and under the leadership of Colonel Sturtevant, the Marine Expeditionary Unit Commander, and we deployed on the USS Baton on the ships. That was their goal, to keep us, again, under the Marine Corps wing. Don't let us slip out like the Navy SEALs that eventually broke loose and got off the ships. The Marine Corps wanted us working for the conventional forces. And as you well know, the defense military industrial complex, all these generals, the no general left behind program involves generals like you've all seen, General Mattis, General Austin. Where'd they all go? Austin came from Raytheon. Mattis went to General Dynamics. So they all want to appease, and they realize, like, I better do what the Secretary of Defense says to some degree. And that's why the General Brown, in charge of the Special Operations Command, did pull us off those ships, and he sent us into Afghanistan, right there in the Tor Bora Mountains, at the base of the mountains, right at the Afghan-Pakistan border. And that's where we conducted 30 patrols. And on that 30th patrol, our mission, Steve, was to conduct aggressive combat operations across Regional Command East. And that's exactly what I set out to do with our Marine Special Operators. And on this mission, on the 4th of March, we were blown up. And then we received fire from both sides of the road. It was 9 o'clock in the morning.
Well, hang on. I just want to make sure. I just want to make sure people understand. The Afghans, these guys have been fighting this war a long time. The Taliban. This was what would you call a complex ambush? IEDs, crossfire, defense in depth. I mean, they had this plot. Do you think they had a leak on intelligence of know that you guys were coming to set the ambush?
Yes, you're teasing the book there, Steve, and I appreciate that. So we had made forward coordination earlier that morning with an Army unit, right, assigned immediately on the Afghan-Pakistan border. This was an Army military police unit, and they were out there in their vehicles doing rehearsals. And some people think, well, that's good. That's what you're supposed to do before you go out on patrol. But they were doing it in broad daylight in the valley, right at the base of these mountains surrounding there in the Khyber Pass, which, in all honesty, it was stupid to do it in broad daylight, telegraphing that you're about ready to go on patrols. And their immediate action drills consisted of, when they'd say contact right, they announce what the drill was to the enemy. That's, guess what is up in those mountains? Observers, observing the military camp. So they'd see them do these drills, and the Army soldiers would duck down inside the turret and yell, run, drive, drive. So they were basically rehearsing that if they got attacked, they would duck and run. That patrol was heading out that morning. We headed out before them, and we went further south up into the Tor Bora Mountains to do visual mounted reconnaissance of routes that we could later conduct reconnaissance patrols in the mountains where we were assigned to conduct our patrols. Eventually, the Army did take additional time to leave the base, and that allowed us to finish our reconnaissance of the mountains. And then we entered the road heading into this village, this first village on the Afghan side of the border there, at the Afghan-Pakistan border. Let's have your audience consider this is basically can be compared to an Amazon fulfillment center. So at that time, we could not go into Pakistan. So they would get foreign fighters, and they'd fully radicalize them in Pakistan, and then they'd move them across the border, because we Americans just paid for the first paved road in Afghanistan. So they weren't coming across the mountains where we were told to conduct reconnaissance. They just bribed the border guard. They came right across, and then they'd end up at this basic logistics node. Think Amazon fulfillment, like I said. So they would link up there with their handlers, and the Taliban would protect that with suicide bombers. And on that morning, we knew, we had the information that there was 4 suicide bombers. We even knew where they were located. So, but this counterinsurgency strategy that both Petraeus and General Mattis both authored and came out in a joint doctrine, that was implemented in late 2006, in October 2006, when we fell under the NATO rules of engagement. And so instead of using information to go and target the enemy like we had done for years in combat operations in Iraq, no, now we had to go actually conduct a tribal leader engagement, sit down, have chai, discuss this over. Hopefully this Taliban-controlled village would give us some intelligence, but that was kind of ridiculous. But that is what these leaders, they didn't ever want to go and win the war. All they wanted to do is go fight the war, spend money, spend lives. But then all these weapon systems that are sold by the military industrial complex to the military, well, those generals who are on those boards make lavish salaries, get flown in on the Learjet right into Reagan International Airport, and they got their return on investment. Let's keep this war going forever. We had won it up until 2005. Now they went into the process of losing it.
Major, just hang on for 1 second. We'll take a short commercial break and we'll return. I got Major Fred Galvin. The book, it reads like a thriller, a great war story. It'll keep you on the edge of your seats, and I'm not going to give away the ending. Major Fred Galvin joins us on the other side in the War Room.
War Room Battleground with Stephen K. Bannon.
Okay, welcome back. When you read this book by Major Galvin, just out from Adam Bello and the team at Post Hill Press, A Few Bad Men, you are haunted by the question, how does this country find men like this? It is unbelievable. The valor, the courage, but also the strength of character to go through this Kafkaesque nightmare where you know what you did was right. You know what you did was for the good of your country, for the good of your men, for the good of your unit, for the good of the pride of one of the most famous fighting groups in world history, the United States Marine Corps. And you just see what's going on. And I don't want to give that part away. This is a book, and when I say you must read it, particularly everybody that's interested in national security affairs, everybody interested in the military, and everybody's very concerned, the America First part of our audience that's very concerned about these constant deployments. Look, Major, I got to bring you in here because my daughter was 101st Airborne and deployed to Iraq. And I got to tell you, when she was gone, you sit there and you understand, you pray every night, you just understand it is in God's hands. You absolutely have, particularly a control freak like me, you have absolutely no control whatsoever. But then you read what happened to you, and I got to sit there. I just sat there and go, my God, for the grace of God, this did not happen to Maureen or her unit or something like this, because it's absolutely, it's almost like a Hitchcock thriller. That's why I don't want to give away the end. The twists and turns of this thing are amazing. The question I have for you, do you feel that your country or parts of the Defense Department stole a big number of years of your life? Because I don't know how you went through this and finally to be, well, I don't want to say what happened. I'm not going to say what happened, but do you think that you had part of your life stolen?
Yes. So the 7 of us who were falsely accused, it did destroy portions of our lives. The health, we had the co-defendant that went on trial with me, ended up getting cancer. He survived, but had to have severe surgery, radiation. His senior enlisted, who was a complete physical stud, ended up getting diabetes and nearly passing from that. But the divorce, the financial ruin, this is something that I wish was never something that could happen even to our worst enemies. When you have your own government put a gag order on you and use this information warfare to paint a picture that you mass murdered civilians, because they kept moving, and I don't want to give everything out in the book, but they continued to move the media out of the courtroom during all, not just defense witnesses with exculpatory evidence, but the character witnesses. So all the media heard was this one-sided false narrative that we mass murdered these individuals. Now the jury heard everything and they acquitted us. But what happened in the press for 7 more years that I continued to serve, and you made a nice statement about us that we were this elite band of warriors, but some people probably question our judgment, because the request that myself and the rest of us was to go right back overseas and fight. And that's what we did. And I continued to serve for 7 more years until I hit service limitations. But then they continued to attack us even the day I retired.
It is unbelievable.
So the press just would do these hit jobs.
I'm gonna have you back on later in the week to go through it more. Do you have any media or speaking engagements that people can know of? The book is A Few Bad Men. You can get it on Amazon right now. In fact, if you order it, it'll be there the next day. A Few Bad Men. If you love the military, and particularly if you're America first, because we cannot allow this to ever happen again. What happened to these heroes? Major, are there any book signings, or is there do you have a book tour coming up? What is going on with rolling the book out?
Yes, we have a few. When I attended the University of Texas at Dallas, I'll have an upcoming one to the MBA students and the alumni there at Dallas on the 8th of October. We also have one at the Marine Memorial Hotel on the 13th of October. And then we have 2 of them in Oceanside, California, just south of Camp Pendleton, where I was stationed for 12 years. Yeah. And that will be at the Barnes & Noble in Oceanside, as well as the Brown Theater on September 11th, 2022.
I'm talking to my producer. I think we got to figure out how to get you to CPAC and come and join us at CPAC, because you need to do a book signing there. Major Galvin, what is also your social media? How do people find you on social media?
On Twitter and Facebook, they can find it at FC Galvin. I'm also on LinkedIn, Fred Galvin, and they can look at the website at www.commandoshow.com.
We're going to have Major Galvin on subject to his schedule later in the week, because I want to talk about the senior command and the rot that's at the Pentagon right now, which comes through in this book, A Few Bad Men by Major Fred Galvin, United States Marine Corps, retired. Major, thank you very much for joining us. Honored.
Thank you very much, sir. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Okay, I want to bring in Brian Kennedy. Brian, you're the founding chairman, or the one of the founders of the Committee on the Present Danger China. It's mind-boggling how this happened. But since I'm cramped for time, tell me about the Clermont Institute. The great Clermont Institute has been so much of the intellectual thought leader, and really you've been one of the great guiding lights there. The New York Times went after it hard over the weekend, but when I read it, I called you. I said, "Brother, this is like a paid advertisement. Tell me about the Clermont Institute and the New York Times coming after you guys hard."
Yeah, well, it was actually the Washington Post. Just a slight correction there.
Oh, was that the Post? Okay, fine. Yeah.
Yeah, Mark Fisher and Isaac Stanley Becker, and these are two
Oh, wow.
left-wing journalists who hate Trump. They hate the Trump movement. They don't like the idea of conservative intellectuals fighting back against, all the political forces and all the establishment. It's one of the reasons they're going after you so hard, Steve. It's not just that you helped win the election in 2016. You continue to fight, and the media simply despises that, as does the left. In this piece in the Washington Post, they go after the Clermont Institute, which was really at the forefront of making the argument that President Trump's victory was important, and it was important because politically he was realigning the country behind the principles of the American founding limited constitutional government and the idea that America is a good country. That's one of the things the media really despises about both President Trump and the Clermont Institute in this article. And so in it, they go after our colleague who's been on the War Room many times, John Eastman. And John, of course, as we know, had come up with a strategy for dealing with the theft of the election on January 6th. And so they're trying to use the piece to discredit John, to discredit President Trump, to discredit the Clermont Institute, but it simply doesn't work in a way, because the Clermont Institute stands for American freedom, American liberty, and a defense of that. And the one thing I think they don't like about the Clermont Institute the most is that when you talk about conservatives, I know CPAC is coming up, but when you talk about conservatism, what are we conserving these days? Well, at Clermont, they're conserving, if anything, the American Revolution and the principles of the American Revolution and the principles of American liberty. And those are the things that are just so powerful. So much of conservatism today is just about, working the Washington process and proposing these laws and that laws and cutting taxes, and it's been dubbed Conservatism Inc. The thing about Clermont, it really was a revolutionary and is a revolutionary organization, and that's one of the reasons that so many Clermont folks went into the Trump administration with the ambition of dismantling the administrative state that you yourself have talked about.
No, I tell you what you can tell the anger of the post of the WAPO writers is how could intellectuals be attracted to Donald Trump and what he stands for? I mean, because they've always made Trump as just this barbarian, right? How could they have these really smart guys? So they have to be corrupt. They have to be on the payroll. There has to be something twisted about them. But that's what's amazing. Hang on a second, Brian. I want to do this with you here because you've been so great and as an intellectual leader about Stop the Steal. And by the way, the New York Times, I got that one right. The New York Times over the weekend had the New York Times magazine was Stop the Steal right on the cover with a beautiful, beautiful black and white photography. It's all throughout. There's their cover story. You've got Tina Peters. You got everybody. In fact, Tina Peters is Mastriano and Tina Peters are a big part of this story. I want to bring in now Jeff O'Donnell and Draza Smith. So, Jeff, explain to our audience, take like 5 minutes and make the best case because it's kind of confusing. You put up any chart you want. I think Memphis has got your stuff. Make a case here so people can understand why Tina just didn't get beaten because they had somebody that faked it like she was MAGA, but she wasn't. And why do you say it's the machine? So make the case for Tina Peters.
Thank you very much. In looking at the data that came out of the primary, and I want to point out that it took us months to figure out what data came out of the originally of the 2020 election and what it meant, and now we're basically able to see that in real time now in the primaries and from now on. The data that we had to work with, which is largely the data that was in the election night reporting, it shows a very unnatural pattern of voting. And what I mean by that is that if you look at the election by what was reported on election night, the gap between the candidates, in other words, the number of votes between candidate one and candidate two, between Anderson and Tina Peters, for instance, in her race, it was fixed within the first couple of updates during the night and then remained remarkably the same the rest of the night. These are mail-in votes. They should be arriving fairly randomly when they're brought in. And this is not the only race. Other races in the state show that same thing. There's a good example. You can see that the difference between the blue and the red line, the blue is Anderson and the red is Tina Peters. The number of vote difference between them was established within the first 2 or 3 updates and then maintained in lockstep the rest of the way. And the fact that happens isn't natural. And it was the first thing that I spotted that led me to believe that there was something wrong, especially since it happened in many races. Now, if you could bring up the Lauren Boebert race, I'll show you what is a more natural something that we look for. You'll see when that comes up that in that race you see a more you see the blue, which is Lauren Boebert, and the red, which was the other candidate. It sort of increases over time, as you would expect in a not close election like that. The ratio between them changes, or the number of votes between the candidates, it changes during the night. And that is what you expect to see. The fact that we don't see that in the Senate race and Tina's Secretary of State race and also the governor primary race is definitely something that is alarming and needs explained.
Draza, you want to jump in here and give your perspective on it before I go back to Jeff?
Sure, thanks. So I've been looking at a little more detailed at the county level. And when we look at the county level, we've been able to get the cast vote records, which is how the votes are counted ballot by ballot over time. And when we look at that, I sent in some graphs about that, and you can see as the votes come in, some things that are really interesting with the ratio between Hanks. So we can talk about that, but there's a vote between Hanks and Hanks and O'Day for the Senate, and Tina Peters and Pam Anderson for the Secretary of State, and then Lopez and Ganal for the governor. And when you plot out the ratio of votes, you would expect that the people that were supporting the America First candidates in one race would support the American First candidates in another race. But we see an extreme delta between those two. So some people are coming in and voting for the America First candidates at the beginning of the race, and then not at the end of the race, and vice versa for the other races, so that they end at the very same ratio. And it looks like the candidates had the same amount of support, when in fact, when you look at how it accumulated over time, it's not the case.
Let me go back to Jeff for a second. Jeff, if this is is this your pattern recognition? If this is the best you've got, or if this is the information you got, why can't you go into court with that and force some judge, or go to court and make a case with lawyers that this should give you some sort of injunction or TRO or something to stop the process, so you then have some time to try to get organized to go back and have a hand ballot count? I mean, what evidence besides these graphs and obviously the anomalies, as it looks like in the patterns of how the votes came in? I mean, what more do you have than that, or is that basically it?
Well, in my opinion, what you just heard is two different ways of describing the things that weren't right, that don't look right in that election. One through the election night reporting, and one through the cast vote record that comes right from the county itself. In my opinion, this should be enough information to get a temporary restraining order, to give people time. It's only been a few weeks now since that election. And there's a very short window that they give you to try to come up with proof. And we can't make up data as much as we'd like to. We have to use what we have and what is available, and getting this data takes time. But hang
on. This is what I'm saying. With what Draza has at the county level and what you've shown, do the lawyers not think that's enough to go in and make a presentation and say, hey, all we want to do is slow things down here so we can get into it and actually take a look at it? I understand that Tina's trying to raise money to, I think the deadline's tomorrow, as she said on the morning show, to be able to raise $236,000 in order to get, and it's got to come in donors in $1,250 increments, which is tough. That you have to, that if she doesn't do it tomorrow, it goes away. So why wasn't the information you had enough to go into court and try to get a judge, at least to get some media exposure, and get a judge to focus on particularly what Draza has?
I'm not privy to all of the machinations legally. In my opinion, it should have been done. I thought that, I actually, in my opinion, I thought that it was happening, and it may still be happening. I would approach it both ways. Simply because you never know what sort of a judge you're going to run into and what other problems you have.
Hold it. Let's say you walk in, and I'm going to get to Draza in a second. Let's say you walk in, we're in court today, you're in front of a judge, and it's one of these hurried things. You got to get in. You're trying to get just a restraining order or a TRO or an injunction to stop everything in place. Give me your best argument without pointing to any graphs. You're just sitting there in the docket. What's your best argument to the judge? The judge, we need to look at what because of these anomalies. What's your best case?
My best case is, well, you have to admit that there are these anomalies that occurred. There are other anomalies in that some internal polling that they have was very, very different than the result that happened. But also, I think that what you have to say is,
but hold it. Hang on. But the internal polling is not going to count. Particularly, internal polling on a primary for a Secretary of State in a state could be so far off as to be things. So that's what. But tell me the evidence. I understand there's a crisis of confidence, but what's the evidence you're going to tell the judge that we need an injunction to stop so that we can get in there and spend days, weeks, or months, however it's going to take to get to the bottom of it? What are you going to tell the judge? Is it the pattern recognition you've got in these charts?
If I could talk to the judge, I would tell him it is the patterns in this chart, and I would relate those back to patterns in the 2020 election, which are similar, which showed fraud then. To me, that's enough of a probable cause to push the brakes on this thing and make sure they get it right.
Draza, you've got 60 seconds. Make your case to the judge, ma'am.
We are seeing the exact same things that we saw in the 2020 election. When we look at the cast vote records from the machines, we see that the initial votes start with a very heavy preference for the candidate that was not expected to win. And then we see it rise in ratio over time towards the candidate that would have been the expected to win, but they never do win. But there's never any step back for preference for that candidate that started out with such a heavy ratio, even though the votes are the majority of the votes are mail-in, which should be a random opinion of the entire county. So that kind of statistical segregation is very odd when you get the same shape in a Democrat to Republican that you get in a Republican to Republican primary.
Okay, Draza, give your social media. How do people find out more about what you're doing and to get to the bottom of this? Where do they go?
Hi, you can find me on Telegram and Truth Social at Lady Draza, and I am posting the majority of my research and studies there.
Okay, we're going to get that. Jeff O'Donnell, how do people get to you? I'm going to have you back later in the week, but how do people get to you, sir?
All of my research is usually out on magaraccoon.com, MAGA raccoon.com, and I'm also on Telegram under A Lone Raccoon.
A Lone Raccoon. Okay, we're going to get this all up on the social media right now. Brian Kennedy, thank you. Brian Kennedy, your social media, how do people track you, sir?
Brian T. Kennedy on Getter and on Truth Social.
Brian Kennedy, you and Clermont came out pretty well. WAPO, Jeff Bezos, Amazon WAPO didn't lay a glove on you. In fact, I think it's a paid advertisement. You ought to put that up on your website. Sir, so honored that you came on and helped me out this hour. Appreciate it.
Well,
tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, we're going to light it. Thanks, brother. We're going to light it back up in the war room. We'll see you back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m.